Jessica.
Okay.
No, you go first. Sorry, this is your show.
This is like two chefs in the kitchen here. Okay, guys. This is Jessica Honegger, founder of the social impact fashion brand Noonday Collection. Welcome back to the Going Scared podcast, where we talk all things courage, entrepreneurship. And today's a totally weird show because my producer, Eddie Kaufholz, which he always phonetically spells for me on the show notes so that I say
not
it
an easy name. It is not an easy name to say. So
it's not easy, but then I feel like I pronounce it. Do I overpronounce your name? Kaufholz.
Are we going to really talk about this?
Yes, let's do it.
You do.
I know I do.
But it's not wrong. It's just way too right.
It's too right.
It's Kaufholz. But I don't. Kaufholz.
Oh my word. But I've been saying it for 2 years. It's like one of those things where I can't. It's like woman, my woman thing.
I do.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
It doesn't bother me, but you've got an accent, but this is who you are. This is how you're talking. So I don't.
Yeah.
Does it bother you?
Okay. So for those of y'all that don't know, when I was recording my book, Imperfect Courage, I mean, it's a book. So much of it is about female empowerment. So you can imagine how often the word WOMEN.
Yeah.
That's probably the most frequently said words in my book.
Right.
And so I'm loving recording the book because at one point I had wanted to be a Broadway actress in middle school. And
you did?
Oh yeah. I was really into tap dancing and performing. And so I'm having my moment of getting to just be in this recording studio and really taking the reader along on this journey. And they had to stop every 10 minutes. And the producer's like, Jessica, you're saying women. And I'm like, yeah. She said, this is plural. It's women. And so we were like, it's women like Yemen.
Yeah.
We tried every which way. And I think I did it okay for a little bit. And then I overpronounced it. So then I would say women.
Yeah. No.
And now I just do what I do, women. And I say women for plural. And that is what I do.
Listen, I don't mean to make too much of a lesson out of it though. But this is like everybody talks like this. There is nobody that does not have a few words in their dialect that are a little bit unique to them. And so I'd rather you not change it or work too hard on it because this is just like how you talk, right? This is how you would say it. And I think that that's kind of part of the show is you're not trying to be some NPR announcer. You're being a person talking to another person with other people listening. So I don't think you should change it. I think you just are who you are.
Well, I think I've proven that I can't. And so therefore, I'm going to be overpronouncing your name. So Eddie is the producer of the Going Scared podcast.
Love it. I'm not even editing.
Please edit.
I will.
He is in charge of taking out my ums and my likes and also creating really coherent conversations as well as being a creative partner for us here as we develop these amazing series that we're able to bring to you. And Eddie is a podcaster in his own right. The first time I met Eddie was when he interviewed me for the International Justice Mission podcast.
Yeah, the new activist. I loved having you on.
That was fun.
It was like you said yes to being interviewed on that show before you should have. Like you were doing us a solid because you were like, it was like people no one has ever heard of, and then like, oh, Jessica, oh my, wow, fans have, so I appreciate it. This
is what Eddie does. Eddie pumps me up way too much, but it's okay.
It's real.
We all need it.
Not fake.
And then you have a podcast now with Annie Downs.
Yes, Annie and Eddie keep talking, which is exactly what it sounds like. We just keep talking.
Y'all keep talking.
It's just like this.
It's like this. Okay. And then do you have any other podcasts out now? Because I know you used to do something with Relevant.
No, ma'am. Not on Relevant. Just those two and get to produce your show and get to be on the creative team at IJM and get to work with the Noonday team. So that's just about enough. I feel like that's a good plate.
Along with raising 2 little children, and his wife is in law school. And I personally just don't know how you do it. People say that to me and I'm like, you haven't met Eddie Kaufholz.
No, that you really did not even, you're not drifting farther away from the last name. You should not, you just can't overthink it or do overthink it for my amusement. Okay. But what I love is today I get to interview you and talk to you, which I'm very excited about because the team proposed this idea to you. There are a bunch of people that get to be a part of this podcast that think through it and kind of are following your lead on this. And we were like, it's 10 years of Noonday. I feel like you should talk about that on the show. So I get to ask you questions today. I'm curious how you feel about getting the camera turned, the microphone turned on you.
Well, this part comes so naturally to me. I love just sharing my story, the story of Noonday, the story of impact. That sounds so narcissistic to say I love sharing my story, but I believe we all actually are meant to, share our stories. So I am excited and I feel relaxed because oftentimes when I am doing podcast interviews, it requires a lot of effort and energy to interview other people, and especially this Art of Difficult Dialogue series.
Mm-hmm.
It just, and during this whole season in America right now, we interviewed an African-American police officer.
Mm-hmm.
We interviewed a former Black NFL player. We interviewed
well, he's still Black. He's just a former NFL player.
That's true. He is. He would still be Black. Thank you, Eddie.
Sorry.
That's right.
That was an unnecessary
he was a
joke.
former Black NFL player. This is why I need Eddie in my life, because I will come up behind an interview and I'll be like, because what happens to me
I'm so sorry.
is I have about, me, I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. I have 30 thoughts in my head at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, some of those thoughts simply get mixed up and the words will form new words. My idioms, it's the joke. I'm the butt of the joke at the home office. I'll say things like, a bunch of balls are falling through the cracks.
Oh yeah, classic.
And just so many things like that. And so Eddie comes behind me and cleans it all up. But that requires a lot of effort for me to steer a conversation in a direction. I'm constantly thinking, what do my listeners want from this? If I'm listening to this podcast right now, what am I going to want to hear next from this guest? So I don't have to deal with any of that today. I'm just chatting with Eddie.
You just get to chat. Okay, so then here's the first question. And by the way, since we're all getting our Enneagram numbers out, you know that I am a 4. So prepare for 30 minutes of feelings questions, because that's
very uncomfortable.
I know. Here we go though. So first question, 2020. I'm just curious, like, how you're doing, because we're recording this behind the curtain November 4th. So day after election is still being decided. Massive just year of, we all know everything that is just now considered 2020. I'm curious how you are and how your family is.
Thanks for asking. I've been so overwhelmed by how Noonday Collection has been able to thrive during COVID, when back in March, our revenue plummeted because we are a company. I have championed the message that we are meant to physically gather face to face. I have championed, even in this digital age, we're meant to connect. It's eye to eye connection. And our entire company was built on that premise. 95% of our revenue at Noonday Collection came from in-person gatherings. And that completely plummeted in March. And then in April, we pivoted to in-person gatherings. And our ambassador community, the accountability and the responsibility that they feel to really create opportunity for the vulnerable, and then the need they had for income in a time when a lot of their income from their other jobs was also plummeting.
Oh, right.
There was just a sense of true sisterhood coming together. And it's like we've been building this safety net for all of these years for women here, for women around the world. And the safety net held. Like, it held. And I think that overarching story has been one that's carrying me through right now, which we just pulled the trigger. We did not pull the plug.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying
here? No, I know. You're doing great. You're doing
plug.
great. I know you're doing great.
Not sure which one it is, but what I'm going to say is that we just switched two of our boys to a brand new school. They start next week. And so it's been a little bit civil war in our house. We found out that the school they were going to a wonderful school, but they were going to go back in person because my husband and I both work outside the home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going to be on computer all day, and only 10% of the kids were going back. And as I got on the phone with the advisors there, they basically said it's like detention like environment.
Yeah. Right.
So we decided to switch them back to where they were, which, by the way, they loved, but they now had really fully identified with this new school. So that we're sending them against their will, which we don't often do that
right.
as parents. Actually, we're very collaborative in how we parent and empowering our kids. And this is the first time Joe and I are like, we know what's better for you, and we're going to do this. So on the family front, things have been a little bit more turmoil than they usually are. But we're making it through. We're walking through. We're doing it.
You are really interesting because I feel like so many of us, the listeners of the show, have walked through 2020 with your family. Like some of it you're saying, and I'm like, oh yeah, I knew that. How did I know that? And it was like, oh, because you shared it. Or we know about the conversations you've had around race at your dinner table. We know about conversations you've had around devices and kids getting their first phone. It's just been interesting to walk with you these past years in the show and kind of watch your family evolve together. I'm curious what it's like for your family to have some of their life be public for the sake of us learning and going and doing better with our own kids.
You would have to ask them,
Yeah,
but
that's a great answer. That's right.
They're very proud that I have a blue check on Instagram, which is really embarrassing.
That's hard to get. Blue check on Twitter, anybody can get, but Instagram blue check, you gotta earn that.
I don't know about that. All I know is that they're like, Mom's got a blue check. So,
big deal. So they're okay. They're into it. Yeah.
They are really proud of what we get to do as a family. They have been able to travel to so many of the countries where Noonday works. We host artisans in our home pre-COVID. They are just really a part of what we do. And what we do is create opportunities for vulnerable people and empower women. And that's just something that's a part of their story now, too. And they really love being a part of that story. Now, as they get older, and I mean, in fact, a podcast that you're about to edit, which you haven't edited yet, was, I interviewed Kurt Thompson last week for 2 hours, and then we're going to edit it into a 3-part series. And the first part of the conversation, he started saying some things that had reminded me of a conversation I'd recently had with my daughter, Amelie. And so I kind of put some stuff out there, and in my head, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to say, hey, do you want this to be public? Do you not? And, so I am thinking a lot more about those things. And when I wrote a book, I read the whole manuscript out loud to them before it was published. So we're sensitive about that. But in general, what I would say is they're really proud of what they get to be a part of.
Yeah, they're also helping us, which is an interesting thing. I mean, their conversation with Officer Jefferson a couple weeks ago was like they were asking questions on our behalf. So while they don't have to do it, it's super helpful. It's super helpful to know that about conversations they've had around, when to get, was it Amelie who's getting a phone? Like all of those things that they've released through you to us to let us hear have been just such an interesting and helpful part of the show. We're here talking about 10 years of Noonday. And I've been trying to, in my mind, kind of what does 10 years mean? And in some ways I'm like, wow, a decade, you've really been at it for a while. And then in some ways I'm like, I'm wearing a flannel right now that is older than 10 years. So like, how do you conceptualize a decade of Noonday? Does it feel like it's been 5 minutes, or does it feel like an eternity or something else?
As I am very oriented towards the future, 7 on the Enneagram, we are oriented towards the future. And I spent most of the last 10 years just always looking towards the future and when we were going to basically arrive to some point in time that meant we had made it. It meant that thousands of artisans around the world were thriving and people were no longer poor in the communities where we were working, and that Noonday was this household name, and you turned on the Today Show and, Jenna Bush Hager's wearing Noonday every single day. And Oprah's like, yeah, Noonday, of course. And so I've had these very audacious dreams and ambitions for Noonday Collection. And I think, and this is the same, you work for IJM when you are working for this mission that's so important. It's easy to justify that not strife, but that striving and that ambition, and to kind of become almost bow down to the mission. And so I think for me, the last 2 years have been some of my biggest learnings since launching Imperfect Courage. And then since Noonday, we quit growing as quickly as we were growing. And I just didn't realize how much that ambition and success was tied up in my own identity. And it's really just been the last couple of years that I've been on this journey of truly working from a place of being faithful to the mission and not from this point of arrival in the future, and learning to really appreciate what we have. And so I think because that's been my big lesson over the last 2 years, now that we're at 10 years, instead of thinking we should be so much further along, oh my gosh, we could have accomplished so much more. Instead, I'm like, wow, I think about the businesses that I knew when I started off 10 years ago. I think about businesses that have creeped up that are artisan or social impact, and how few are even still around. And I am actually just sort of like, wow, I can't believe I get to do this. I can't believe I get to be a part of this. I can't believe I get to show up every day. Our team is working so well, which there was a while where things were so toxic because we'd grown so quickly, and our culture was not one of empowerment. And we've just done so much work around, Travis and I have really, my business partner, have done so much work around our own partnership and building trust and in our team. And so now I can look and I just take this exhale of deep, deep appreciation and gratitude that this is what I get to do, and that I get to do it with so many people around the world.
You said that there's been this learning curve of kind of, in a way, separating yourself and the success of Noonday from the success of you as a human being, right? Like you are caring deeply about it. But how do you go about doing that? Because I'm so aware, especially people listening who are in their first years or just at that starting point where you literally have to put your whole self into this. Like I've never started something like this, but I mean, I've heard you talk about the early days of Noonday, and it was like, you have to bleed for this place, really. How do you then kind of begin to walk out of that so that Noonday can, like, what's the principle that you had to learn for Noonday to be able to exist and succeed and continue to grow, but for you to be okay, despite the natural ups and downs of business?
Well, I had to really own the myth that there is a point of arrival.
Oh, right. Oh, that's interesting.
There actually is no point of arrival. Huh. And I was speaking with a friend who worked for Steven Spielberg for a while and shared some story about some wild success story that the rest of us were all behind the scene or all here going, oh my God, that movie, that was this blockbuster, whatever. But behind the scenes, there was something more. Right. And so there's always something more. We can always want more than what we already have. That is not based on what we have. That is a mindset. So for me to realize there is no point of arrival, there is no place that suddenly I'm going to get to and I'm going to say, wow, finally we're successful, or finally we've accomplished fill in the blank. And I had to let go of that myth and learn to operate from this place of, am I being faithful to what God's asked me to do? And that's what success is for me. So it truly is redefining success and letting go of outcomes.
Ooh, that is hard. I mean, that's very hard. Have you ever, in this first decade, wanted to quit?
I'm sure that yes, I have. And I naturally, for me, I talk about this idea of being cornered by courage,
Hmm.
where, I didn't want to have an epidural for my child births
Right.
because I really wanted to stand in solidarity with the women around the world. But I knew if I had access to an epidural, I'd be like, yeah, come on, bring it. So I had home births because I was like, okay, I'm just going to not have access to that. Or, I do group workout classes because when I go work out on my own, I'm like, 10 minutes, I move my body, that's good. But when I go to a class, I'm not going to just get up and leave in the middle of the class. So I'm someone that knows that I have this tendency towards not being a finisher. And so I create these places where I kind of lock myself in to not being a quitter. And so because of the noonday model, where if I were to quit, I would quit on Naima, who is in Uganda, who's been in a domestic violent relationship and finally got out and has this job because of Noonday, because of making paper beads, which we create a marketplace. So I have very real faces that I see in my mind's eye every single day. I see Rosario in Guatemala. I know what her family has gone through. I know what she's done to fight for a better future for her daughter. If I quit, I'm quitting on her. So for sure, are there times where when things get hard, especially with leading and with, I know I had some of this, back even in March when I thought it was all done. I truly did. I thought this is done. And I was in shock that 10 years was going to just go up in flames. And I'm like, do we just get out now? Do we just let go of everyone now and, have a sidewalk sale? But again, I just had to believe that God cares for the poor and that this story is bigger. And so I think it's because I am basically locked in. I know that's such a kind of negative way of saying this principle.
No.
But there is this level of responsibility and commitment that I feel where it doesn't matter if I want to quit, I can't, And then what's so great is when I go through those times, other people hold me up. It's like, okay, no big deal because I got you, Jess,
Right. You are not in this alone.
I'm not in this alone.
A global movement of ambassadors. You've got your, team that's with you at headquarters. Like you've got your people to like walk with you through that. Man, that is such a what an interesting fire you've got inside you. Have you always had that? Have you always had that kind of drive? Because I could think about quitting something. Like I could totally consider it, but you just don't seem to have that quit in you, or you've set up safe gaps so that when that happens, you just don't allow yourself. Is that just something you're born with, or is that something you've cultivated throughout your life?
I do think that when you connect your purpose to a higher purpose and to other people's purposes, and when you see that you matter in this world, that you aren't alone, and that actually the way you show up in this world can impact other people's lives. And when you own that truly, that your presence matters, your talents matter, that you are someone in the world who can help create opportunity and freedom for someone else, then that's very empowering. And I did happen to discover that at a young age. I was a weird 15-year-old. And, it's crazy because I feel bad. I feel like I'm putting my daughter's 14 now. And I just, at a young age, was a very discovered this purpose. And nothing was really going to stop me after that. And now that I have a 14-year-old daughter, I can see how unique that is because I'm like, oh, yeah, she's just like doing her schoolwork and making it through volleyball practice, where I was like, we need to go and raise money for every child in Africa to have an education, So, yeah, I think that it's just been many years of cultivating a very kind of singular purpose that has given me that fire.
Yeah. I'm always struck by your leadership too. One of the things that you actually don't talk about on the show, but is revealed a lot in the show, is that you are a real learner. You will casually talk about, I read these couple books, and you're not doing it as for any other reason than you're drawing on your knowledge in order to lead and grow as a person and have just a wide array of conversations that we have both on the show and that you have just in your life. I'm curious, what cultivated you being such a learner? And kind of the second part of that is what does that do for you as a leader and as a person?
I do think that curiosity is a posture that we can all have, and it's just a beautiful way to live in this world, to wake up every day and wonder what am I going to discover today that I might not already know? And what conversation am I going to have? And I love stories. I love people's stories. I love connecting with people. I think that's why I love this podcast. And obviously, as the CEO and Chief Creative Officer of Noonday, I've got a lot of other things going on outside of Going Scared. But what I love about Going Scared is that it really is my sandbox to be able to pursue my own curiosity while also bringing other people along for the journey and letting all of you guys in on listening to my learning too. And I learned from you, and I'm able to kind of bring that to the conversation. So I don't know where I got it from. I mean, my dad is he's super curious guy. And I mean, as a 7 on the Enneagram, that's kind of par for the course. We love storytelling. So yeah.
Yeah. You also, I mean, just on the leadership front, you talk to a lot of people about how they lead and what makes them lead as they do, and kind of what makes them tick. And it's interesting as I think about your leadership over the last decade, because you really went from this one woman band to spearheading a global movement in a relatively short period of time. I mean, a decade, like we said, is both a lot of time and no time. So I'm curious, what have been some of the major growth points for you? I know we talked about kind of the personal separation of being able to be fully who you are and have it not be fully connected to the success all the time of Noonday. But I'm curious, like, what has been some of the major leadership growth points for you? And also, what have you been awesome at? Because nobody ever asked the second question. Everybody says like, oh, what's been hard? I mean, like, yeah, there's been a hard, but also in what ways are you great at this?
Well, and I think part of the journey is discovering that part, right? What am I good at and what do I need to let go of? I think that as a founder, you start off doing everything, and the discovery process of what do I need to hold on to and what do I need to delegate is sort of the essence of what a leader does, especially at those beginning stages. At the beginning of Noonday, I think one of my biggest learnings was to know that I needed help and to bring on a business partner. So that was a really, really big piece in me cornering myself into courage. Because when it was just me, myself, and I, that first year, I mean, I was able to build something, but I knew that it was just the foundation and that Noonday was going somewhere. However, I knew that I didn't have everything it was going to take to get me there. And when I spoke with Travis, who I was friends with his wife, and we were doing childhood swaps. I would babysit their kids, they would babysit my kids. And I was babysitting his kids one night, and I saw this giant stack of Excel spreadsheets on his dining table. And I was glancing through these spreadsheets, and I thought, I don't know what's going on there, but I think I need that. I need some people who know how to do spreadsheets. Yeah. And Travis and Suzanne, I had met previously while they had been living in Africa. She'd been working with HIV/AIDS for 3 years. He had been running a microfinance loan bank. My husband and I were in Mozambique one summer. We met up with them one night. So we were friends, not close friends, but friends. And I reached out for Travis and said, I need help. This Noonday thing, it's got legs, but I'm not sure what I need here. And So I just began to meet with him before he would go off to his corporate day job. And those casual coffee conversations eventually turned into him asking me if he could be my business partner, 50-50 business partner. He would quit his job and live off their life savings in order to see if this was going to actually turn into a viable company. So you can imagine just the sense of responsibility that I'm feeling. Already I was feeling responsibility for the Ugandan artisans, some Guatemalan artisans, Ethiopian artisans, but now I'm like, oh, I got to make this work for Travis and his wife and 3 children. And I think that was a huge turning point of me saying, this isn't going to be just a side gig. We're going to go for it.
Right. This is a thing now. But I got to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. But baked in that was you just breezed by it casually, but your willingness to ask for help takes a lot of vulnerability, because you had to then admit to yourself that there was a thing you needed help with. And I think that that's a really hard principle. Was that just easy for you to know, like, all right, here are my strengths, here are things that I need help with? Or was that a process by which to like admit to yourself you needed help and then bring him into that?
I will say that is one of my key assets as a leader. I ask for help, and I do it in a way that just comes from my natural, it comes from such an authentic place that so many people have come along. I mean, I had a friend, oh yeah, I'll do the logo. Okay, I'll build your first website for free. And I think since we're such a missional company, asking for help in that area of my life has not been a huge issue for me, but is something that I tell young business people is that's a key principle. You need to know that you can ask for help and then to receive that help. So yeah, that was kind of my first big, we are going to go and build this company. And then by making that decision, what that meant is I'm going to be a working mom, which I'd previously identified as kind of, working from home, side hustle. So I had a lot of identity tied up into what being a good mom meant. And the story I had told myself is that a good mom can't work outside the home.
Wow. So, I mean, this is all crashing in at the same time, because you're having to make massive decisions of like, all right, you've got a business partner and you've got like artisans around the world now on the hook. So you're like, part one of this is you're saying like, okay, now I've really made a thing here. I got to really do this, because it's more than just, my tail on the line. It's a lot of people really caring about it. But then also you're having to walk through this pretty large personal decision of that's pretty fundamental to who you are, which is like, how do I want to care for this family that I've been entrusted with? Like, was that ultimately was that a hard decision to make? Like, or how do you make a decision like that in the midst of all that other pressure?
It wasn't so much the decision to partner. Yeah. Of course, taking on a business partner is a really big decision. But it was more just this narrative that was playing in my mind that was sucking my energy. And I knew that that couldn't be true, but yet it felt true to me that I couldn't be a good mom and work outside of the home. So that's just something that I really had to work through. And, as my dear friend Kurt Thompson says, is we anticipate our futures by how we remember the past. So if we can learn to remember our past differently, we can anticipate a new future. And I mean, I grew up with a stay-at-home mom and a dad who was very much proud of that she was a stay-at-home mom. And I just came from that generation. And so I just had to create a new story, and even my mom helped me with that. My mom helped me by saying, my gosh, you're a far better mom than I ever was. Like, working within the home or out of the home has nothing to do with your good momness, And so I just had to shed that and just remember my story differently so I could anticipate a new future. And then, as I kind of shed that, I was able to walk a lot more into my strengths as a leader. And then we had a pretty big crisis, our first really big crisis, when we over inventoried, had $1 million of excess inventory sitting in our warehouse, and we had a cash crunch on the horizon. That was also a really big learning how to lead and be transparent with our ambassadors in the midst of that, and how to walk with our artisans through that. I would say that was like our first really big learning as a company. I mean, there's just been so many. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, if you want a leadership journey, go start a business.
Yeah, I bet. And just what you would have had to have gone through in a decade, in just the decisions you've had to make from this to where you are at right now has had to have been just an insane 10 years. You've been very kind to look backwards. I know that's not like your typical MO, but I am curious, in our last little while together, as you begin to look and stare down the next decade, I'm curious what, I don't know how to ask it in a more clever way. So I'll just ask it like, what do you think the next 10 years is going to look like? What percolates in you? What gets you excited?
When I think about the leadership journey that business ownership has done for me, I am such a believer in being in the arena. I am such a believer in, I love to read. I love to listen to podcasts, but ultimately life is learned out on the playing field. We've got to practice these things, and entrepreneurship creates such a beautiful, heart-wrenching space to practice. And that's ultimately what we're doing. We're creating entrepreneurial experiences for women here in America to have to get out of their comfort zones, to ask for help, because Noonday is completely, our business model is asking people to open their homes to host, asking people to open their online communities to host, asking people to join and say, hey, do you want to come along with me? And for some reason, people are just mortified and fearful of asking people, and because it creates this space of vulnerability, and people are afraid of rejection. They assign meetings to outcomes. And so I love that I really get to walk with women here through those same exact places of fear that used to keep me stuck. And I don't just get to write a book about it, and I don't just get to, be on a podcast about it. I actually have created a space, an environment, a playing field for people to get out there and work out those issues on the field. And then around the world, it's the same thing. The leadership journey that our artists and entrepreneurs have gone on, and the lessons that they've gotten to learn, and the leaders they've become in their community, and they're now developing other leaders as well, and are helping those leaders to develop other leaders. So being able to create a space, a playing field, an arena, whatever you want to call it, for other people to get to actually build their courage muscles through entrepreneurship, through asking people for help, through hard conversations. Those are the things that get me so excited, because they ultimately lead to more freedom for more people.
Yeah, because this really always comes down to the story of the actual people, right? Like, this comes down to, like, when I asked you about 2020, the response was basically talking about the people around the world who are deeply connected to Noonday, and hoping that it holds on because of those people. This really is about the stories of the people that are the artisan partners, who are the ambassadors, right? Like, are those the pictures in your head that at this point are the currency of what you do?
I would say, yeah, the pictures in my head are of me dancing with women in Uganda and with ambassadors, when we got to and when we used to be able to travel, and we take our ambassadors around the world for these trips, and we get to dance with artisans, and we get to break bread together, and we get to share our stories, and to see that we're each empowering one another, and that our stories of freedom help usher in freedom for more people. That is what I carry in my heart, what gives me so much joy every day, just knowing I get to be a part of partnering with God and creating this story of unity and of freedom and of flourishing around the world, and that it's not just mine. I think back to that first year, the solopreneur, where it was just me kind of trying to build, and now I've got so many people who are partnering together to build. And that is what makes this so much fun, is because I'm not alone. We're all getting to do this together.
Okay. As the person who edits the show, that should be the last word, because it was so good. But I am remiss if I do not ask you the question, Jessica Honegger. How are you going scared?
I mean, making this decision to send my kids to a different school when they don't want to go.
Yeah, that is really hard.
Yeah, I mean, it
that's
is.
Real hard. It's hard on them. It's hard on y'all. This is not.
Yeah, just decision making in this environment is very complicated and not how it was.
Right. Because even while Noonday celebrates in 10 years and we're looking to the future, like life continues to happen. And a lot of that's great. And some of that is really hard. And it all takes an immense amount of bravery and courage.
Absolutely.
Jessica, this is normally the point where you close the show. Do you want to do it? Do you want to do some impromptu reflections about me? And then,
my gosh, so awkward. Okay. Well, let me ask you just really quick. I mean,
give it to me.
You can edit this out or not. But what have you learned from just being a producer on the Going Scared podcast?
Oh, what's been interesting is that, as a producer of the show, you have to listen to conversations that in your own normal podcasting world would not be in my demographic. So listening to, conversations about you've had conversations about health and wellness along the journey that are not geared towards a 40-year-old guy. It's not, but that it has been so applicable and helpful. And so I find myself editing it to hear ums and, check and make sure that things sound like they're supposed to. And then I find myself sitting back going like, wow, that person was just really, that was actually speaking to me. And so I think my favorite part of it is hearing about a world that I'm not necessarily a part of, like this entrepreneurial world where I'm not particularly entrepreneurial in and of myself, but to hear these principles of leadership and these principles of bravery and these principles of mental health and wellness and empowering women, and both, I think, understanding a part of the world better, but also personally being affected by it, I think has been my favorite part. I'm also been struck by, I'm on a bunch of podcasts and have been on podcasts for a decade, and I do not talk about myself a lot on these shows. I sometimes deflect by being funny, or I just don't talk about my world a lot. I have been very impressed at the amount of which you are willing to be vulnerable for the sake of you learning, being a better person, but also teaching us about our own lives. And that to me has always been like, wow, I cannot believe the level of honesty that you're willing to go to for the sake of the listener. And that is another thing that has been helpful for me and has caused me just in little tiny ways to dip my toes in the water just a little bit more. Just a tiny bit, like, all right, maybe I'll share this, and maybe I'll talk about this. And so those have been the two big things that always strike me about the show.
Well, it's been so fun to do this show with you, and it's been fun to have this time just reflecting on 10 years. And I just want to thank you, because I think you were the one that said, 10 years, this is a big deal. This deserves some airtime on the podcast. And I just want to thank you for calling that forth. And I wanted you to be the one to interview me. So it's been really fun.
I'm privileged that you asked, JH. Thank you.